I'm Eva Quinn, 34 years old. I still remember the moment it all began, as if it happened just a second ago. I was standing in the break room, stirring a splash of oat milk into my morning coffee. The bitter aroma and the quiet hum of the espresso machine were my small daily pleasures, moments of calm before the day's chaos. That's when he walked in, Daniel Cole Jr., the newly minted CEO and son of the company's founder. He didn't greet me. He didn't smile. He didn't even acknowledge me. It was like I was another piece of office furniture he planned to toss out. "Ava, I need to see you in my office. Now." It wasn't a request. My fingers tightened around my mug, and I felt the pulse of adrenaline kick in. I'd been at the company for over a decade. In that time, I'd built the client services team from scratch, closed some of our biggest deals, and trained half the people in the department. But none of that seemed to matter to Daniel. His father, Daniel Cole Sr., had built this company with sweat and integrity. Daniel Jr. inherited the title, and he acted like that alone made him untouchable. I followed him down the hallway, trying to swallow the tightness in my chest. He didn't even sit down when he got to his office. "You're fired," he said flatly, like he was talking about the weather. I blinked, stunned. At first I thought it was a joke, a sick joke. "Excuse me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "You heard me," he said, flipping through a stack of papers like he was browsing a takeout menu. "Pack your things and leave. Effective immediately." I stood frozen, my heart hammering in my ears. I wanted to scream, to demand an explanation. But all I managed was a smile. A calm, polite smile. "Understood," I said. "Have a nice day, Daniel." I turned and walked out, my head held high, even though I was shaking inside. My teammates glanced up as I passed their desks, confusion and concern on their faces. Some of them stood up ready to ask questions, but I gave them a slight shake of my head. "Don't make this harder." Packing up 11 years of memories into a single cardboard box was surreal. My nameplate, a framed photo of my parents, my collection of coffee mugs from different cities I'd visited for client meetings. As I drove home, the memories came in waves. 11 years of late nights and early mornings, missing family birthdays to finalize a deal, comforting clients on the phone while holding back tears after my own messy divorce. I gave this place everything I had, and it didn't matter. But instead of anger, I felt something else, curiosity. Why, that question haunted me all night. I barely slept. Something about Daniel's cold, careless delivery didn't sit right. And the timing, it was suspicious. We were on the brink of finalizing the Horizon Tech deal, the largest contract I had ever worked on. I'd spent half a year preparing for it. I knew the client's business inside out, had even scheduled the final negotiation for Friday. And now, with one sentence, I was gone. The next morning, just after 9:00 a.m., my phone buzzed. I didn't recognize the number. My gut twisted, but curiosity won out. "Eva, it's Daniel Cole Sr." The familiar voice sent a jolt through me. The real CEO, the man who had given me my first shot at this company 11 years ago. "I just walked into the office," he said, voice tight, with restrained anger. "Why the hell did you pack up and leave?" "What happened?" I hesitated. "Your son fired me," I said, my voice steady. "He said I was lazy, that I wasn't needed anymore." Silence. Then a deep inhale. "Yesterday," he said that yesterday. His voice was low and controlled, but I could feel the fury behind it. "Yes," I said softly. "Eva did. He even read your contract?" My brows knit together. "What do you mean he's supposed to finalize the Horizon Tech deal today, right?" "Yes. We were scheduled to meet with them at 11:00. "God damn it!" he muttered, shuffling papers in the background. Then a loud thud, like he'd slammed his fist on the desk. "Eva, your contract has a clause. One I insisted on after the Lexington fiasco. You're not just the account manager, you're the only authorized negotiator for Horizon Tech. Without you, the deal can't legally or ethically move forward." I felt my breath catch. He hadn't read it. Daniel Jr. hadn't bothered to read the contract. And that's when everything inside me shifted. The betrayal still stung like a fresh cut, but beneath it, I felt something else control. Daniel Jr. had moved too fast, and now the gun he pulled was pointed straight back at him. Mr. Cole hung up without another word, but I could hear his fury even in the silence. I sat motionless in my tiny apartment, my coffee growing cold beside me, staring at the sunlight glinting off the skyscrapers. I let out a small, bitter laugh. After 11 years of building something real, it was all brought down by an arrogant man-child who thought he could rule without understanding the cost. A part of me wanted to march back into that office to watch the fallout firsthand. But another part, the part that had spent years swallowing my pride and working twice as hard to be seen, wanted to let them burn. Let them feel what happens when you treat loyalty like a commodity. At 10:13 a.m., my phone buzzed again. This time, it was Daniel Jr. I didn't answer. I watched as the calls kept coming: reception, legal, accounting. My phone was lighting up like a slot machine. I didn't answer any of them. Finally, at 10:32, a text message from someone I hadn't spoken to in years, Alana Green. She used to be my second in command, before she'd transferred to marketing. "Eva, you won't believe what's happening here," she whispered through the phone. Daniel Sr. just stormed into the boardroom. He had the Horizon Tech contract in his hand and demanded to know if Daniel Jr. even read it. He didn't. Everyone saw it. The entire office is buzzing. I closed my eyes and exhaled. What did he say? He told Daniel Jr. if this deal falls through, his position is negotiable. She paused. "Eva, you have the upper hand. Whatever you decide to do, know that." I ended the call and stood up, my head clearing like a cloud lifting. I wasn't just a pawn in their game, and I wasn't done. I changed out of my pajamas, took one last deep breath, and prepared to step back into the storm. By noon, I was back in the building that had felt like a second home for over a decade, but I didn't walk in through the employee entrance like I always had. Today, I walked through the front doors, straight past the marble reception desk like a guest. Heads turned. Conversations paused. Whispers rose in my wake, but I didn't let them slow me down. Miss Quinn, the receptionist, stammered, her eyes wide. "Mr. Cole is expecting you. He said to bring you straight to his office." "Thank you," I said softly, following her down the hallway, lined with framed awards and bright corporate slogans. I had walked these halls 1,000 times, but today every step felt different, like I was reclaiming something. When we reached Mr. Cole's office, he was already waiting at the door. He wasn't smiling. The tension in his shoulders told me everything I needed to know. He stepped aside to let me pass, and I felt his quiet fury in the air. "Ava," he said, his voice low. "Thank you for coming in." I nodded, but didn't extend my hand. My heart was still beating fast, but my face stayed calm. Inside his office, the air was hushed, the blinds partially drawn. I sat down across from his massive desk, my back straight. "I made a mistake," he said, as he closed the door behind him. "A big one. I gave Daniel too much freedom too soon. I thought he'd grow into it, but instead, he used it like a child playing with matches." I stayed silent, letting him speak. He sat down slowly, the weight of the past day's revelations pressing on him. "What he did to you, it was more than unprofessional," he said. "It was reckless, and it jeopardized everything we've been working on for the past 6 months." I met his eyes, calm but unwavering. "Yes, it did." He leaned forward, his elbows on the desk. "I read the contract again this morning. Every word. You were given full authority over Horizon Tech. Legally, the client won't negotiate with anyone else from this company but you." "I remember," I said. My voice was quiet but firm. His eyes softened. "You didn't deserve what happened yesterday. I'd like to offer you your job back, full authority to finish the Horizon Tech deal. No interference from Daniel, no exceptions." I hesitated, searching his face for sincerity. "If I come back," I said slowly, "I want it in writing. A revised contract, clear autonomy. And I want this in front of the board. No more private deals that can be undone with a phone call." He nodded immediately. "Done. I'll have the legal team draw it up today. And one more thing," he added, his voice grave. "This can't happen again. Not to you, not to anyone." I held his gaze. "That's the only way I'll agree." Silence settled between us, heavy and absolute. Then he stood. "We have about 30 minutes before the Horizon Tech team arrives. I'll make sure you have everything you need." I rose to my feet, feeling the last of the fear slip away. I wasn't just back, I was stronger. And I was done letting people like Daniel Jr. decide my worth. As I stepped out of his office, I saw Daniel standing down the hall, arms crossed over his chest. He tried to look casual, but his jaw was tight and his eyes were locked on me. I didn't flinch. I didn't even slow down. I walked straight past him, and for a split second, I saw the flicker of something in his eyes, uncertainty, the first crack in his armor. The conference room was ready when I arrived. Polished glass table, fresh water glasses lined up my printed notes stacked neatly. I took a seat at the head of the table, feeling the steady calm that always came over me before a big negotiation. This was my domain. At 1:30 sharp, the Horizon Tech team walked in. Their CEO, Mr. Saeed, was a shrewd negotiator who had seen enough corporate games to spot weakness a mile away. He scanned the room, his sharp eyes landing on me. I stood and greeted him in Arabic, a gesture of respect I'd learned from my years of working with international clients. His eyes lit up and a rare smile creased his face. "You remembered," he said warmly. "Respect matters," I replied. The meeting began, and I found my rhythm like slipping into an old song. Every point, every term, every pivot, we covered it all. Mr. Saeed was sharp, but I was sharper. 2 hours later, we shook hands on a final deal that would be the envy of our competitors. A deal that I had fought for every inch of the way. As Horizon Tech's team left, Mr. Cole approached me, his relief almost visible. "You saved us," he said. "And I owe you more than just an apology." I looked at him steadily. "You owe your company a leader," I said quietly. "One who knows the difference between power and responsibility." He didn't argue. He just nodded, a weight lifted from his shoulders. Later that evening, I walked back to my car as the city skyline shimmered under the fading light. My phone buzzed with messages, congratulations from old colleagues, polite praise from managers who'd once looked right through me. I read them all, but didn't let them sink in too deeply. I knew how easily people's loyalties shifted in this world. But as I unlocked my car, a sudden thought stopped me cold. I remembered Daniel's face in the hallway, how he hadn't tried to stop me, hadn't even tried to spin a lie in the meeting room. Men like him don't just vanish, they retreat. And then they strike again from the shadows. I had seen it before, sabotage dressed up as minor mistakes, small cuts that could bleed out your reputation until you were just another casualty of office politics. That night, I barely slept. My mind replayed every step of the day, every crack in the foundation I had spent years building. But instead of fear, I felt resolve. This was my line in the sand. I wouldn't be blindsided again. At dawn, I took out a fresh notebook and wrote down every detail, every doubt, every whispered conversation. Because if Daniel Cole Jr. wanted a war, he was about to find out that I didn't fight fair. I fought smart. The next week passed in a blur of meetings, strategy sessions, and endless emails. The Horizon Tech deal had made headlines in the industry newsletter Cole & Co. secures landmark partnership with Middle Eastern distributor. The article didn't mention me by name, but I knew everyone in that building knew who had sealed that deal. But with every nod of respect in the hallways, every polite smile, I felt the undercurrent of something else. Whispers. Pauses in conversation when I walked by. People who had once been allies avoiding my gaze. Daniel Jr. was gone, suspended indefinitely, while the board evaluated his future, as the memo delicately put it. But men like him didn't disappear. They waited. They schemed. The first sign was small. An expense report for my Horizon Tech trip was delayed with no explanation. Then, a client document I'd submitted was mysteriously unsigned, sitting in an inbox like a ticking clock. I told myself it was just office disorganization. Until Tuesday afternoon, when IT flagged an email that had supposedly come from me, one I never wrote. It was filled with errors sent to a major overseas partner, the kind of mistake that could kill trust in an instant. I felt my blood run cold. I called the partner directly, and they were gracious, but the damage was done. Doubt had been planted, a seed that could grow into a forest of suspicion. I reported it to our internal systems team, my voice calm, but my stomach knotted. They confirmed what I already feared: the email hadn't come from an external hacker. It had originated from inside the office. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my living room, the city lights winking in the darkness outside, and I remembered something from years ago: a former boss at my first job who'd done the same thing. Whispered sabotage, disappearing files, death by 1,000 paper cuts. I wasn't 24 anymore. I wasn't going to vanish this time. The next morning, I started documenting everything. I bought a new leather-bound notebook, no digital trails, no risk of someone accidentally deleting my notes. Every time an email didn't arrive, every delay in paperwork, every suspicious pause in conversation, I wrote it down. Names, times, dates. A paper trail stronger than any rumor. I had learned that the best way to fight corporate games wasn't with anger. It was with facts. But I didn't have to wait long to confirm my suspicions. One afternoon, I was walking past the conference room when I heard Daniel Jr.'s voice too loud for a private conversation. I paused, standing just out of sight. "She's unstable," he was saying. "Since she came back, she's been erratic, aggressive. I don't think she's fit to manage high-profile clients anymore." My breath caught in my throat. I stayed absolutely still. "I'm just saying," he continued, his tone casual, but with that dangerous edge I'd come to recognize. "Maybe it's time to think about succession planning for client services. She's clearly overextended." Another voice responded, a young executive I didn't recognize. "But the Horizon Tech deal, she pulled that off under insane pressure." Daniel Jr. scoffed, dismissive. "She got lucky. We can't run a company on luck." I stood there for a long moment after their voices faded, my heart pounding, not with fear, but with an icy determination. He was trying to do it again. Paint me as the problem, poison the well so I'd be forced out quietly. I wasn't going to let it happen. That night, I stayed late at the office. The corridors were empty, the glow of city lights reflecting on the polished floors. I sat alone in the glass-walled meeting room, reviewing every file I had. I was done playing defense. I was ready to fight back. A voice cut through the silence, low and tired. "Still here, Eva." I looked up to see Mr. Cole standing in the doorway. He looked older tonight, the lines around his eyes deeper, the weight of everything pressing down on him. "I could ask you the same," I said softly. He stepped inside, a folder in his hand. "Your revised contract," he said. "Everything you asked for: full autonomy, no interference from Daniel Jr. or anyone else." I opened it and read the words, feeling a quiet satisfaction. It was solid, no loopholes, no vague promises. Just clear protection for my work. He sat across from me, folding his hands. "I've also started an internal audit," he said. "Too many things have been misfiled lately." I met his eyes. "You think he's behind it, don't you?" Mr. Cole didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was quiet. "I'm not blind, Eva. I know Daniel isn't done, but I needed to see how far he'd go." My fingers tightened around the folder. "You're trying to protect the company," I said. He looked away for a moment, then back at me. "I'm trying to protect both of you. But maybe it's already too late for one of you." The room fell silent, the only sound the hum of the city outside. I thought about all the years I'd spent here working late, giving everything, trying to prove that I was more than just a line on an org chart, and how quickly that could all be twisted into a story about instability or aggression by someone who didn't care about the truth. I closed the folder with a quiet snap. "I don't need protection," I said, my voice firm. "I need you to decide what kind of legacy you want to leave behind." His eyes met mine, something resolute flickering there. Then he nodded and stood. "You're right," he said. "I'll handle it." As he left, I felt a strange calm settle over me. I knew what was coming next, the real battle. The audit would bring everything to the surface: the sabotage, the lies, the manipulation. But I wasn't the same woman who had walked out of Daniel's office that morning, dazed and shaking. I was done letting other people define me. When I finally locked up and left the building, The night air was cold and clear. I walked through the lobby head high, feeling the weight of every step. Daniel Jr. wanted me gone. He wanted me broken. But he had underestimated the one thing that would always set me apart. I didn't break. I documented. I adapted. And I waited for my moment. It was coming soon. And when it did, I'd be ready. The air in the office felt electric the following week. Every conversation, a low murmur. Every glance carrying a question no one dared to ask aloud. The internal audit had begun, and everyone knew it. I could feel the tension in every footstep, every clipped greeting in the hallways. People were nervous, and honestly, so was I. I'd never asked Mr. Cole to launch the audit, but deep down, I was relieved he had. The truth needed to come out. Not just for me, but for everyone who'd been walking on eggshells since Daniel Jr. took over. Still, I knew better than anyone how these games played out. In corporate life, truth doesn't always lead to justice. Sometimes it leads to quiet exits, golden handshakes, or worse buried truths that never see the light of day. That Thursday, I was called into the audit committee's temporary office, a dusty storage room transformed into a war room. Stacks of files, computer monitors, glowing with data, and a whiteboard covered in color-coded timelines. It looked like the scene of a police investigation. David, the lead internal auditor, greeted me with a firm nod. "Eva, thanks for coming. We'd like to ask you a few questions about some recent irregularities." I took a seat, my shoulders squared my face, calm even as my heart pounded. "I understand." He pulled up a file on the screen. "First, this email that appeared to be from your account. It was sent to one of our overseas partners with incorrect details about the Horizon Tech deal." I clenched my jaw. "I didn't send that email," we know David said. "Our IT team traced it back to a shared workstation near the break room. Someone manually entered your credentials. This wasn't an external hack, it was internal." A cold wave of resolve washed over me. Who had access to that workstation? David hesitated. "We've narrowed it down to a few employees. But we also noticed unusual activity linked to Daniel Jr.'s executive assistant's login." I sat still, my hands folded in my lap. "You think he's orchestrating this?" David met my eyes. "We're not accusing anyone yet, but there's a clear pattern. Someone's trying to undermine you to sabotage your reputation." I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the truth settle in my chest. "What happens now?" "That's the tricky part," he said. "Mr. Cole asked us to present our findings directly to him. He wants the truth, all of it, no filters." I nodded slowly. "Then I'll be there." David raised an eyebrow. "You're not required to be present for the internal report." "I want to be there," I said firmly. "If this is going to come out, I want to look everyone in the eye when it does." He didn't argue. He just nodded, a flicker of respect in his eyes. That night, sleep was a distant memory. My mind kept returning to the faces of the employees who had left quietly over the past year, people in their 30s and 40s who'd once been rising stars, but had vanished without fanfare. I'd thought they were just chasing new opportunities. Now I wondered how many had been quietly pushed out, their reputations dismantled behind closed doors. By the time dawn came, I was ready. Dressed in my sharpest suit, hair pulled back in a sleek twist, I felt like I was armoring myself. This wasn't just a meeting, it was the culmination of everything I'd worked for. I wouldn't let them rewrite my story. When I arrived at the executive boardroom, Mr. Cole was already there, standing by the window, staring out at the city skyline like a general before a battle. David and two other auditors were setting up their files, the air heavy with unspoken truths. 10 minutes later, Daniel Jr. arrived, phone in hand, his face carefully composed in that practiced smugness he wore like armor. He paused when he saw me. "She's not on the audit committee," he said, his voice sharp. Mr. Cole didn't turn. "She's here at my request." Daniel's jaw tightened. "This is supposed to be confidential, internal. Then you shouldn't have used company resources to forge emails." I cut in my voice, calm but like steel. "Or to sabotage my work." Daniel's eyes narrowed, a flicker of panic behind his practiced arrogance. "That's ridiculous," he snapped. "She's just bitter about being let go." David spoke up, his voice quiet but firm. "We've traced multiple login attempts tied to your assistant's account, all of them connected to irregularities targeting Eva's work. There's a clear timeline, Daniel." The silence in the room was deafening. Daniel shifted his weight, his usual smooth confidence cracking. "You're reaching," he said, his voice trembling. She's unstable." I looked him straight in the eye. "You didn't let me go, Daniel. You tried to erase me, but you failed." Mr. Cole finally turned from the window, his face grave. "I gave you a chance, Daniel," he said quietly. "I gave you more than one. And you've done nothing but tear down the people who were trying to build something real here." Daniel's face drained of color. "This isn't what you think," no, Mr. Cole said, his voice soft but final. "It's worse." A heavy silence fell. Mr. Cole stood, his shoulders straight. "The board will be reviewing this report. Until then, you are suspended. Effective immediately." Daniel opened his mouth, but the words never came. He looked at me one last time, not with rage, this time, but with disbelief, like he'd finally realized that none of his usual tricks were going to save him now. He walked out without another word. When the door closed, Mr. Cole exhaled, the weight of years of decisions and mistakes sagging his shoulders. "I failed him," he said softly. "As a leader, and maybe as a father." I reached for the words, but they didn't come easily. Finally, I said, "You can't lead someone who refuses to grow. But you can still lead this company." He looked at me, something shifting in his eyes, and nodded. For the first time since this storm began, I felt the weight on my own shoulders lift just a little. I had fought to prove I was more than expendable, and now the tide was turning. I knew Daniel's exit wasn't the end. Men like him always found a way to crawl back in. But I also knew one thing with crystal clarity: I had weathered the storm. And I was still standing. 2 weeks had passed since the audit committee had delivered its verdict, but the ripples were still traveling through every corner of the office. Daniel Jr. His name was no longer spoken out loud, but it lingered in every cautious glance and every whispered conversation in the break room. The board moved swiftly after the report. The evidence was too strong to ignore the falsified emails, the suspicious logins, the deliberate sabotage of my work. They didn't issue a press release or call for a meeting. Daniel Jr.'s departure was handled quietly, almost surgically. One final email to the staff, effective immediately, and that was it. He was gone. The gossip mill churned like crazy for days. Some said Mr. Cole had pulled strings to keep the family name out of the headlines. Others whispered that Daniel was trying to land a new job out of state, but no one would touch him. His legacy here had been reduced to a cautionary tale. I thought I'd feel triumphant. But when I heard he was officially gone, I felt calm. Not victory, just relief. Like I'd finally stepped out from under a shadow I hadn't realized had been following me for years. A few days later, Mr. Cole called me into his office again. He was sitting behind his desk, a folder in front of him, his expression more thoughtful than I'd ever seen. "Eva," he said, his voice quiet. "I've spent a lot of time thinking about everything that's happened these past months, and what I want this company to be moving forward." I waited, the familiar tension in my shoulders easing just a bit. "You've shown more leadership in the past month than most people show in a career," he said. "You held this company's biggest deal together under impossible pressure. You faced sabotage rumors and personal attacks, and you never wavered." He slid the folder across the desk. Inside was a letter, an offer for a new position, Director of Client Strategy. An executive role, one that reported directly to him. I stared at it, my heart hammering in my chest. I hadn't asked for this. I hadn't even thought it was possible. And yet, it felt right. He must have seen the hesitation in my eyes. "I know you didn't ask for this," he said. "That's exactly why you deserve it." I looked up at him, steady. "If I accept," I said carefully, "I want a say in how we move forward. I don't want to just hold a title. I want to build a culture where no one else has to fight like this, just to be heard." His lips curved in a small, genuine smile. "That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say." I took a breath and nodded. "Then let's do it." Later that night, I sat alone in my new office, the nameplate still blank on the door. It felt surreal. For years, I'd walked these halls as the woman behind the deals, the calm voice in the storm. Now I was something else, something more. I didn't kid myself into thinking the battle was over. The corporate world didn't change overnight. But I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't going to be another silent name on the roster. The next morning, I got to work. I reopened lines of communication in the department, talked to people who had been pushed to the margins, people who'd once felt invisible. I made time for the younger employees who'd watched the chaos unfold. Some of them asked me, shy but hopeful, "How did you stay so strong?" I told them the truth. "You don't always get to choose the battles," I said, "but you do get to choose who you become in the middle of them." For the first time in years, the energy in the office shifted. Laughter returned to the break room. Ideas started flowing again. People no longer spoke in hushed tones when I walked by. And that was worth more to me than any title. But even as I settled into my new role, small reminders of the past still crept in. One afternoon, I was reviewing the final report on the Horizon Tech deal when I noticed a missing document. A tiny omission, but enough to catch my eye. It turned out to be a file Daniel Jr. had quietly pulled months ago, probably to weaken my negotiating position. I had to laugh. Even gone, he was still a ghost in the system. I fixed it, sent it to legal, and moved on. Because that's what you do when you've weathered a storm like this. You don't let it define you. You let it teach you. A week later, I ran into Alana in the lobby, my old second-in-command, who had transferred to marketing. She pulled me into a quick hug, her eyes bright. "Eva, you're an inspiration," she said. "You showed everyone how to stand up when the odds were stacked." I smiled, humbled, and a little embarrassed. I just couldn't let it break me. She shook her head. "It didn't. It made you unbreakable." As the days turned into weeks, I kept that close. Because even as the company moved forward, even as new challenges arose, I knew what I had earned and what I would never let anyone take from me again. On a quiet Friday evening, I walked past the glass conference room that had once been the scene of my greatest humiliation and my greatest triumph. I paused, remembering the fear, the betrayal, the sheer will it took to stand back up. That room didn't scare me anymore. It was just glass and metal and echoes of the past. What mattered was what I'd carried out of it, the knowledge that competence isn't arrogance, that professionalism isn't weakness, and that no one, no boss's son, no whisper campaign, could ever define my worth again. I knew the future would hold more tests. It always did in this world. But I was ready, because for the first time in my career, I was no longer just surviving. I was leading, and I would never ever let anyone take that away. The weeks after Daniel Jr.'s exit felt like a long, slow sunrise, cautious and quiet at first, but then bright and warm as the days unfolded. The gossip died down. The rumors faded, and the office once choked with suspicion and whispers began to breathe again. I spent my days rebuilding, not just in the boardroom, but in every conversation I had. I called in old colleagues who'd been pushed out unfairly. I reopened client discussions that had gone cold in the chaos. I took every opportunity to remind people through action, not just words, that integrity mattered. I also kept a close eye on the little things, the harmless glitches, the excuses that once could have been cover for sabotage. I wasn't paranoid, I was prepared. The audit had taught me that, and I wouldn't let anyone twist my diligence into something ugly. One rainy Wednesday, I stopped by HR to check in on the new anonymous reporting system I'd set up. A young analyst, fresh out of grad school, stopped me in the hallway. "Ms. Quinn," he said, his voice a little shaky. "I wanted to say thank you for setting up that system. For everything, really." I smiled. "You're welcome. Keep speaking up no matter how small it seems. Every voice matters." As I walked away, I realized just how much that was true. In the end, it hadn't been some grand gesture that turned the tide, it had been the quiet moments of courage. The ones no one sees coming. But not everyone was ready to embrace the new dawn. Late one afternoon, a former executive who'd once sided with Daniel Jr. cornered me in the break room. He tried to play it cool, leaning against the counter like he had nothing to lose. "You know," he said, "some people think you just got lucky, that the Horizon Tech deal fell in your lap. That you're just riding the wave. I didn't blink. And what do you think? He smirked. I think waves crash eventually. I held his gaze calm and steady. That's the thing about waves. They might crash, but they're always followed by a bigger one. He didn't say anything after that, just shifted uncomfortably and walked away. I watched him go, feeling a quiet certainty settle in my bones. Let them doubt me. Let them underestimate me. It would only make what came next more powerful. The real test came a week later, when Mr. Cole called an all-staff meeting. It was the first time in years that everyone from accounting to marketing was gathered in one room. The energy was nervous but hopeful, like everyone was waiting to see what the future would look like. Mr. Cole stood at the front, his voice steady as he spoke about the Horizon Tech deal, about the audit, about the company's new chapter. Then he did something no one expected. He turned to me. Eva Quinn has agreed to take on the role of Director of Client Strategy, he announced. She's already begun the work of rebuilding our culture, and I want everyone here to know she has my full confidence. A murmur ran through the room. I could feel eyes on me, some surprised, some approving, some cautious. I didn't flinch. I stood tall, shoulders back, a small smile on my lips. When the meeting ended, people came up to me, some old colleagues, some who'd never dared speak to me before. Their words were careful at first, but then came warmth, support, and real conversation. In that room, I realized something. I wasn't just back. I was finally seen. That evening, I stayed late again. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I walked the halls of the office in the quiet after hours, the echo of my heels on the polished floors, a steady drumbeat of everything I'd survived. I paused by the glass-walled conference room, the place where Daniel Jr. had once tried to break me. It was empty now, the city lights reflected in its transparent walls. I could see my own reflection, too strong, steady, unbroken. I let out a slow breath, feeling the final pieces of doubt fade away. I didn't need to prove myself to anyone anymore. I'd already done it. I headed back to my office, sat down at my desk, and looked at the blank page of my notebook. For a long time, I just sat there listening to the hum of the city outside. Then I picked up my pen and wrote a single sentence at the top of the page: I will never let them take my voice again. Because that was the lesson of everything I'd been through. It wasn't about contracts or titles or boardroom battles. It was about knowing your worth and refusing to let anyone, no matter how powerful they seemed, take that from you. As I packed up to leave, I looked around my office one last time. The desk was neat, the nameplate polished and waiting. The walls, once impersonal, now felt like my own. I knew there would be other storms. There always are in this world. But I was ready. Because this time, I wasn't just fighting for a seat at the table. I was fighting for the right of every person who would come after me to know they didn't have to stay silent. I turned off the light, closed the door behind me, and walked out into the night, my head held high. And as I stepped into the elevator, I realized this wasn't just my story. It was a story for anyone who had ever been underestimated, anyone who'd been told they were too much or not enough, anyone who'd ever had to swallow their pride just to stay in the game. If you've ever felt that way, if you've ever been in that quiet fight behind closed doors, this story is for you. And I want you to remember one thing: you are worth more than any title, more than any rumor, more than any corporate maneuver. Stand tall, speak up, and never ever let them take your voice. If you've ever faced a moment like Eva's, share your story in the comments. Let your voice be heard. And if this story resonated with you, don't forget to like and subscribe for more empowering stories from the world of quiet warriors. Your story matters. Let's keep writing it together.